Hello, and welcome to another episode of our podcast, Making Changes Requires Everyone. My name is Max, and I will be your host for the first segment of this episode. So far at MCRE, or Mcre, we have explored interculturalism and mental health and how these connect to education, race, and so much more. Today we will be tackling the topic of racial profiling and policing in Montreal and beyond. But before we dive into this topic with our guest, I want us all to get to know him. Welcome to the podcast, youth motivational speaker, activist, and spoken word artist, Sven Talamak. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Max. It's a blessing.
Just so our listeners know, you were the MC at a symposium that LaSalle Multicultural Resource Center recently held on the harmful systemic practices in Quebec schools, which are deeply impacting Black children. As soon as the evening was over, I said to myself, we need to have you on our podcast. I was in awe of your presence, insight, and how you approached the topic of systemic racism with as much care and compassion as you did brutal honesty. What would you like to tell listeners about who you are and your journey to where you are today?
First and foremost, Max, thank you for taking the time. And for sure, when, the symposium was taking place, it was a very sensitive topic, something I'm very close to. And I thank you for taking the time and receiving everything I had to say in that way. And for me, when it comes to my journey, I'd say the main thing that I want people to understand is, broken crayon still color. No matter how messed up my beginning may be, it does not dictate my end, regardless of the circumstances that, have taken, a certain degree of shaping me, conditioning me. That does not mean that's who I am. And I feel like too often, like when it comes to young Black males, we're, stereotyped and to fit this cookie cutter mold, especially when we make mistakes in life. Mm-hmm. When we make mistakes, it's as if that's our identity. And I feel like I'd like people to understand that our identity is not just the mistakes that we've made, but what are we doing now, with the mistakes that we've made and the strides that we can make if we really want to make change.
Thank you for that. So earlier this year, CBC Investigates revealed that in Quebec, between the years 2017 and 2022, there was an average of 156 racial profiling complaints that citizens filed against the police per year. Of those hundreds of complaints, only 11 were brought before the Police Ethics Committee during the entire 5-year period, and only 4 of those cases resulted in a police officer being disciplined. Of those 4 cases, the longest suspension of a police officer was only 30 days. What are your thoughts on this?
I feel like it says it all. If we have so many complaints and we also have other data that confirms that people that are Black are stopped like 4.2, I believe the last numbers, 4.2 times more than the average person that's not racialized. I feel like it's super clear the police need to be policed, but not by themselves. The police should have a civilian type of committee or something to investigate them. I just found out today that the RCMP has like a civilian counterpart that investigates them, as well as another law enforcement agency here in Canada. We need the same thing when it comes to police. We can't expect police to police themselves. There's a brotherhood. You follow me? So it's just common sense. It's just relationships. Bureaucracy will always thrive when, it's a brotherhood type of thing. And I get that. Y'all have a brotherhood. We should have our own. The community should have people that represent them, that hold the police accountable.
Yeah. And so in terms of police accountability, you're talking about police, within itself, there should be more accountability and can you elaborate more on that?
For sure. So example that you gave, Max, was there were, I think you said 156 cases or whatnot.
Yeah, it was. So basically, I know the numbers might have been a little confusing, but basically for each of the 5 years, so 2017, there was an average of 156 cases of complaints. 2018, average of 156 complaints. So it was an average of 156 complaints per year.
Right. And out of that 156, I think you mentioned only 5 went to the police ethics committee.
Yeah, and so it's actually more than 156. It's like, so out of those 156 times 5, more or less, out of that big number, only 4. Yeah.
Honestly, I feel like whenever there is complaints about the behavior of a police officer, there should be a civilian agency that should be reviewing that. Too often right now, like, there's a lot of things taking place on camera, and even though these things happen on camera, for some reason, it always boils down to no discipline, little to no discipline. And I don't think that's fair. I think for more equity, more equality, if we really want to see change, we got to do things different. If the police have been policing themselves since they've existed, it makes absolutely no sense. How can we expect to have any real sense of justice or equity when, police officers are policing themselves?
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's definitely a lot to take in, a lot to think about. But for right now, let's go ahead and shift the focus for a bit and talk about schools. So in Montreal and throughout Quebec, there is a very specific linguistic context that can greatly impact new arrivals. Something that was discussed at the symposium is the issue of racialized youth new to Quebec who are learning French in classe d'école being held back or put in special education or adult education when these are not appropriate pathways. And I know that in terms of children being put into special education when that's not the appropriate pathway, it may, especially if we're talking about Black youth, it may not just be Black youth in Canada who are of immigrant experience, but definitely in Quebec with the linguistic context, with there being lots of immigrants coming in who come in without speaking French. I think that that's something that's important to address. And so from what I understood in the symposium, what ends up happening is that an inability to learn French quickly becomes conflated with not being smart enough or not being capable to choose the pathway that's most appropriate for the individual. And what can you say to our listeners about this?
It's absolutely unethical and it's absolutely unfair. So if we have students that are immigrating from countries where their first language is a national language, we're in a country where, not just a province, but a country where we have 2 languages. We have English, we have French. If they're stronger in English, they should be able to go to school in English where they'll perform better. If someone is coming here, and most of the time students don't necessarily have the autonomy to make the decision like, hey, I'm moving to Quebec for X, Y, Z reason. They're moving here because their parents are moving here most of the time. So to put them in a position where they will have a higher tendency to fail doesn't make sense to me. At the very end of the day, when it comes to an academic experience, we want the best academic experience for a child, right? And if they perform better in English, let them perform better in English. I'd rather have a child advancing at the pace that they're supposed to, and maybe they struggle in French. And that's one subject out of everything else. But if you're forcing me and imposing me to learn a new language at the same time that I have to learn a new level of math, I have to learn history, I have to learn all of these things while I'm trying to grasp a language that I have nothing to do with. It makes absolutely no sense. And I feel like it weakens our province. It weakens the riches that come from immigration, the riches that come from people from different walks of life. If these children are not given the ideal academic experience, what will they do when you feel like you fail at something? You start to give up. And this is one of the reasons probably why Quebec has one of the highest rates of kids dropping out, because we're not really thinking about them and their experience. We're thinking about language laws. And I understand language is important, but at the end of the day, the less children that we have that are educated, that are competent and understand and grasp these basic elementary things that a high school degree comes with, well, we're setting ourselves up for failure. Or is this not a step with the motive or an ulterior motive to keep immigrants and people that are not Francophone behind? That's the type of questions that come to my mind.
Yeah, because something else that will sometimes come up is, I don't want to say the opposite, like that's not quite the appropriate way to look at it either, but something that will sometimes come up is children who are essentially going from school grade level to grade level, not knowing the content that they're supposed to, if that makes sense, like essentially being put through the system without fully knowing the content. Does that make sense? Yeah.
100% accurate. I've done presentations on like in so many different schools, and there's been so many times where I've had students that can't even read and they're in Sec 3. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, how did you get here? And sometimes teachers tell me, well, this is the new reality right now. They just let kids pass and pass and pass. Some kids, not all kids. It depends on the kids. See, that's another issue in itself.
Yeah. And so if we are putting together the two topics of policing, or I guess the three topics of policing, racial profiling, and education together, something that comes up quite often in Montreal and elsewhere is the school-to-prison pipeline. If and how is this pipeline different throughout parts of the world, namely throughout North America? And what can those in education, social services, and more do to end this pipeline? Also, given Montreal's police practice history with racialized communities, do you see the mandate of having police in schools the answer to reduce crime in Montreal?
Absolutely not. I feel like having police in school does not reduce crime. So, number one, police officers can't reduce crime. Maybe police presence in certain areas can reduce crime. For example, police presence probably can reduce loitering because people see police around. Police presence probably can reduce certain crimes where people are like, hey, a police officer is here, so I'm not going to commit my crime. But I feel I feel very I don't know. I'm really bothered, not necessarily by the question, but by the idea that a solution to helping youth would be to get police to come into schools. And I'll give you my reasons why. Number one, I've heard the argument that we need police officers in schools because there's so much bullying, and right now with all of the bullying and stuff like that, we need police officers to like intervene. When was the last time you've been bullied at work and you called the police?
Yeah, exactly.
or a boss? It doesn't happen. So why would we take police into the realm of a school to talk like to intervene when it comes to bullying? Bullying shouldn't happen, but it will happen. But that's not how you deal with it. Another thing too is, when has the police, this is one of my good friends, she said this, Stephanie Jalmet, she asked this question in a panel one time. When has the police ever had a good relationship with any racialized community? So you're taking an agency that doesn't have a good reputation, that traumatizes people to a certain degree. A lot of kids have trauma when it comes to the police based on the way they treat them, based off what's going on in the media, based off first-hand experience, second and third-hand experience. So now you're coming into my school, a place where I feel comfortable now. Now you're showing up and I know the way that you see me. Why would, I don't understand. I feel like funds should be dedicated towards community initiatives, community organizations that focus on mentoring, that focuses on helping kids go from A to Z. Not extracurricular activities, keeping our youth busy. I'd rather see kids in a sports program, in a boxing program, like in any other program, than to have police officers come to the school for whatever reason.
Yeah, and for preventing like this school to prison pipeline, like do those resources, those extracurriculars, do you feel that that's something that can help to end that pipeline, or what are some other things that you think can help to dismantle that pipeline?
So speaking from the experience of going to prisons all the time, like all of the federal prisons in Quebec, I've been to most of them, sitting there, speaking to people that are incarcerated, speaking to correctional officers, parole officers, teachers. There is definitely a pipeline. A lot of the correctional officers that I speak to from time to time, they tell me that, you know, if they ever had any experience working in a group home, they find it very similar. They find that there's that connection between the group home and people that are incarcerated. I guarantee you a lot of people that are incarcerated, they had some kind of link with a group home. You see where I'm going? When it comes to this school to prison pipeline, if we're not setting up our children to succeed in school, what do? They drop out. Once you drop out and you feel like you're not good when it comes to school and stuff like that, you still have needs. You still have basic needs that you need, that need to be met. So you might find yourself, you have a higher tendency to find yourself involved in crime. The majority of people that I've come in contact with in prison are working on their high school degree in prison. Why weren't they working on this in school? Why weren't there more funds allocated to help children that may have issues with ADHD and other issues, to find an ideal way to help those kids graduate and actually grasp the material? You follow me, right?
Yeah, I do.
So think about it like this. There's another, perspective that I have. From what I understand, to have someone in a federal prison for about a year, you're looking at about $150,000 in a year. We're willing to spend $150,000 a year to incarcerate someone, but we're not willing to spend that money in a school to give them all the things that they would need for them to thrive. It's definitely not easy for our teachers. I can't even imagine the weight of trying to deal with all of these students at the same time. Why is the government not spending that money there? You see where I'm going? To evade the idea of prison. Like, if children had a sound education and teachers were equipped, I'd rather give that money to a teacher and more teachers to be able to deal with that type of, you know what I mean? To deal with that, to deal with education, to deal with youth. There needs to be a shift in our investment towards them and not making that investment to keep them behind bars. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it is very, very absurd when you think about just how much money goes into prisons every year, and just the imbalance between that and what resources there are available for teachers, for community organizations and things like that. And it's one of those things that, in my opinion, it really goes to show, like, no, the province, does have money, but it's where the money is going to. And that, I think, really just puts a lot of things in perspective. So thank you for touching on that. And what are your thoughts on racial profiling in Montreal specifically, whether that's in schools, whether that's in communities? What have you witnessed? What have you heard? Tell us about it.
Man, I could go on for days on racial profiling. I could go on for days. I mean, one of the most absurd situations that I think about when I think about that question is a good friend of mine by the name of Schneider Narcisse. Schneider Narcisse is a community worker in the Côte-de-Neige area, And think about Schneider Narcisse with a group of youth thinking, you know what, let me connect with the police department so they can have like a group with the youth, talk to them about, what to do when they get stopped, and to kind of like eliminate the bad discourse between these two groups, right? After doing so, within a week, he's going to the barbershop, parks his car, the police pull up on him, hey, where's your ID? He's like, well, my car is parked. They're like, yeah, where's your ID? He's like, my car is parked. I'm just going to the barbershop. And after pestering him, they give him a ticket. He pursues them for about 7 years. What boils my blood when it comes to that is the simple fact that he had the police come to his youth center just a week before. They told him what to do if he needed to make a complaint against the police. He goes to the police station to make a complaint, and they tell them, hey, we don't have that form here. You're going to have to get it online.
Yeah. And you said they pursued him for 7 years?
No, he pursued them in court.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay.
Yeah, he pursued them for 7 years in court, and he won.
Okay.
He won his case. But for me, it's really discouraging. I don't think that all police are the same, but when you go out of your way to get your youth involved with your local police station, and your local police station puts you in that same situation, I just find it very discouraging.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a lot to think about. Wow. Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much. We are coming to the end of our first segment on racial profiling and policing. Sven, thank you so much for making time for us. It was truly an honor. Do you have any final words for our listeners?
For sure. If you do not know this name now, look this name up, Christopher Luamba. Christopher Luamba is a champion from Quebec, from Montreal. He's a champion from Congo. He's a champion in every sense of the word. I'm just so elated at the fact that he stood up against racial profiling and won in the province of Quebec versus the Attorney General. And because of the decision he won in court, profiling while driving became something that was illegal. The case got overturned, like it's being appealed, but just the fact that he won that first time says so much about the gravity of racial profiling here in Montreal.
Yeah, thank you. Christopher Luamba?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Remember that name. Thank you. All right, everyone. I'm your host, Max, and on behalf of the youth at Mcre, I invite you to stay tuned for another segment on racial profiling and policing. Until then, remember to like, subscribe, share, and also remember that broken crayons still color and that making changes requires everyone.